Roxo Media House.
All right, welcome back to FORTitude, everybody. I am J.W. Wilson. My co-host to my left in our new studio setup is one Brenton Payne. We're changing things up a bit, but one thing we haven't changed up, Brenton, is Captex Bank, still our primary sponsor and people we love very dearly. Would you agree?
I totally agree. Thank you for sending us to Dallas for our last recorded episode of the Fan Expo.
You know they don't release them sequentially, so it probably won't match up with what you're saying right now.
I know, but I saw our guest tattoo and talked about the living in the universe unconditionally. I was just trying to put parallels in our universe here.
Thank
it's you. All string theory.
Yes. Thank you, Captex Bank. Thank you, Captex Bank. Another thing we haven't changed is and especially we've improved this one, is our guest. We have a really interesting dude here today, who I've known for quite some time. You're getting to know him a little bit more today than I am, but Marshall Harris. He's a guy who's about to tell us a story. We're gonna tee him up, but here's a guy that you want to listen to, guys. He's a fascinating story, and he's a fascinating artist, among other things. But thank you for being here, Marshall.
Yeah, thanks, Marshall.
Thank you. I'm pleasure to be here, and don't believe anything that JW says.
All right. Well, there's some things in here you can't deny.
Let's start this. How'd you guys get to know each other?
Probably through his art. I became a fan, and I tracked you down in an effort to be closer to you.
Tracking is a politically correct way of stalking.
I stalked him, and
it's legal.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
No, I when I moved back to town, I was doing my art and wondering where I was going to show it, and I think he contacted my dad first to figure out where I was.
That's correct.
And then we had a little powwow and started exhibiting work at Fort Works Art, and that seems like 1,000 years ago,
right.
But it was only maybe 7, 8.
And look at us now.
But did J-Dub, did you look at the art first and then realize the TCU connect, or did you know of Marshall from TCU? Because there's TCU deal, right?
Well, we need to get into that. Let's start at the beginning before we get to that part, because that's part of your story, which is fascinating. But before we get to that, you are a child of a military man, Mr. Marshall Harris Sr. He traveled you around as a kid, but ultimately you wound up in Fort Worth, going to Southwest High School,
right?
Where are you doing art at all at this point in your life? Drawing.
Yeah. I mean, if you're 6'6" and in Texas and you're not playing football, you're playing basketball, or you're playing baseball, or you're running track, or you're doing something other than art. But art was what.
What kind of stuff were you drawing at that?
No. I did anything and everything that sort of caught my interest, and I had a super cool art teacher, Betty Smith, and she discovered that if I just let go of the reins, he'll do stuff. And so, it was ceramics, or it was drawing, or it was plaster casting, or for what if they had a metal shop, which they actually did, they had an automotive shop back then, I would have done some welding and stuff. But so that's kind of what I did when I wasn't being a jock.
Right. And just before we get to the art piece of it, a jock you were, with all due respect, you were quite good at the high school football profession. That led you to the college ranks, where when TCU came a knocking, because of your father's time there, he was a TCU Hall of Famer, which you would end up being as well at some point. You went to TCU to play some ball. Yeah. It turns out you were pretty good at it, and that led you to the next level, the NFL. Yeah. But during the time at TCU, one of the big powerful points about you, one of the most interesting things that I've always loved about you, is about 1976-ish. Is that about right? In your dorm room, maybe it was 77 or 76, you drew a logo called the Flying TCU, or the Flying T.
I think that was when it was birthed. Yes.
And you submitted this or gave it to Coach F.A. Dry?
Well, the assignment was part of a graphic design class that I was taking, and we were doing developing logos. And so you pick a logo that is really bad, and or make up one for a company. And these are relatively new classes at TCU. So I thought, well, TCU's logo really, they don't really have one. I mean, it's just some letters. And this was way before branding or all the marketing came about. So I thought, well, the mascot is a horned frog, and maybe I can make that a little more ferocious. So I came up with a drawing of a horned dragon coming out of this emblem, and then the
Was that too pagan for that school?
I think it might have been too sci-fi-ish at the time, but it was very Frank Frazetta-ish. But anyway, and the Flying T was developed at the same time, because the frog would work on certain things and the Flying T would work on others.
Yeah.
And somehow the football department got wind of it, and I think my position coach said, "Hey, Coach Dry might want to see if we can use the logo for our letterhead." And okay, if I say no, does that mean I don't get to play?
Yeah, yeah, right.
And I said, sure, no, I'm fine. It's just something we designed, and lo and behold, here we are. How many years later? I don't care to count. And the Flying T is still percolating.
Oh yeah,
pirating happening.
It's a wonderful logo. I mean, it is like I copied that thing. In the way you did that letter across, like you bring.
I don't think
together.
It's a really great logo in terms of how logos go.
Well,
what I think it is the time when we went to school there. It was a touchstone because when I went to school there and we played ball there, we were horrible, and I apologize to my players that were played at the same time, but we were not very good. I mean, we was there. I redshirted a year, so I played 5 seasons. We won 2 games.
And the whole time,
and the rest of the games, we were just beat terrible. 64-3.
Yeah.
70. I think Texas beat us 74-2 or something like that. And they were putting the band members on the field because we just couldn't. Our punter had the most yardage of any of the players. He had because he would. Anyway, so. Where was it going with that?
Were you dominating at that? I mean, is it fair to say you were one of the better players on the team? Were you a dominant?
Well, that's
player?
a tricky question. I mean, when everybody's bad,
right.
If you're the least or
it got you to
you're
the
a little
NFL.
bit better than. Well, I joke and I say it's statistical probability. If you're a defensive player and a defensive lineman, the number of plays that you're on the field will help dictate a percentage of plays that you make. And if your offense can only go 1 or 2 plays and then you're back on the field, then you're playing 75, 80% of the game.
You get a lot of exposure.
You get a lot of exposure. And at that time, the running game was the deal, not, passes. There were only 3 things could happen and 2 were bad.
When did the Flying T go on the helmet, though? Were you wearing it during your 77?
77 is when it made its debut on the uniforms.
Okay.
And I think they phased it out in 90.
1 or 2.
Was it when he 1 or 2?
So it lasted a long time.
About 15 years, I think.
Wait, when did you graduate?
79.
Oh, so you were wearing
it.
When you played.
Were you proud? Like as a player, you're playing with your own design. What does that feel like?
Marshall made this thing, man.
I didn't think that deeply.
You
then.
didn't? Okay.
No, it was just like, oh, we're going to get our asses kicked again this week.
Yeah. And it's my logo.
Oh, but I've got a logo on my helmet. Yay, yeah, I'm really cool.
Hey guys, check out my logo.
That's right. We're bad, but I got a bad cool
It's a bad luck logo that Marshall made.
That's right. Well, actually, it was one of the reason the Flying T, there's lots of myths about why the Flying T wasn't revived.
Yeah.
And one of was that Gary Patterson was superstitious about it. He said he didn't want to relive those years when we were bad.
It's a hex.
And whoever would tell me that, I said, well, you happen to recognize that the years that we were really bad were really foundation years, when people said, we don't want to ever be that bad again. And when Gary took over, the team had started to get better. So the Flying T was part of his, but it was also, I think it was on the uniforms of the Rose Bowl, maybe. I don't know that. I think it may have been. I don't know for sure.
No, it wasn't with us. Did they ever approach you in an effort to bring it into the TCU fold, the Flying T logo?
Well, and that's part of the weird. So I left school and I went to New England and was away for 30 years. And in that time, I really didn't pay attention about a whole lot was going on here. And TCU adopted it, and it wound up becoming the mark for the university. It was on, it was painted on the stadium, and I painted a logo on the swimming pool, and it was everywhere. And there was never any discussions about licensing or copyrights or anything like that. So when I got, and through the years, Scott Nix was always a big supporter, and Marsh, we got to take and figure out how to bring the Flying T back. And so there was a whole bunch of pushback from the school for various reasons. But when I came back in 2010, I was approached, and I won't name who approached me, but he said, "Hey, we can have lunch, because I think the Flying T might have a chance of coming back." So we have lunch, and he presents this really well done presentation package. I mean, they put a lot of thought into, in the company that they're working with, a lot of thought into how to rebrand the Flying T. And I said, "Oh man, that's awesome." And he said, "What we're going to do for you is on the merchandising tag, we're going to tell your story about the Flying T and how it was invented, and wouldn't that be cool?" I said, "Yeah, that's great." I said, "But you guys have been using the Flying T for 15, 20 years, and I never heard of anybody saying thank you." So this go around, because I know it's going to be on all sorts of merchandise, and this is a really well thought out strategic selling package. Might be a little something, a little love on this way. Radio silence.
We're buying your lunch for you, son.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to put your name on the marketing tag. And so over the years, I've tried to figure out how to take and make it happen. But this year actually is going to be some interesting developments. I don't know if you guys know the Flying T Club.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're a sponsor of one of our other shows, Frogs Today. Yes.
Yeah. So the guys at the Flying T Club contacted me last year when I was in Europe, and they said, "Hey, we have now with the NIL developments, and we want to take and put together a not-for-profit venture that helps some of these athletes, because the ones that can make bank on their brand, they're playing right next to some kid who his mom, single mom, or they're struggling to be able to come to TCU." And he said, "This will be an opportunity for us to help one, those players, and then two, compete competitively in the recruiting area."
Right.
And I said, "Well, if there's anything I can do," and I said, "Well, the thing you can do is let us use the Flying T."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I'm all fine with it." I said, "But TCU might get their knickers in a bunch." And but I had a meeting with Jeremiah Donati, and I think the Flying T has been given the go-ahead, as long as they're not selling this stuff, and as long as the money made is going back into the school. Because I told the Flying T guys, I said, "I don't have any money. I'm an artist. I can't donate anything, but I can give you the rights to use the Flying T and all that. That's the way I can give back to the school."
It sounds like a record company deal. The artist who makes the record has to ask permission of the distribution company if somebody else down the road wants to use it.
Right. And
what was that thing about the universe and conditions in that?
You trust the universe unconditionally. It always gives you the answer that you deserve, or that is the best for you. It may not be in the fashion that you want.
Yeah.
So in the long run, there's now two people or two organizations that are interested in using the Flying T in a way to give back to the university. And so TCU may bring back the Flying T as part of a historic brand through Retro, and their what's it called? Not a locker. Anyway, the Vault program. So, and because it's TCU's 150th anniversary, they thought, what a great way to take and revive all the logos and all of that kind of stuff and make it available for a short window.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it pops up all the time. You can't go to a game anywhere without seeing somebody's shirt or hat that's pirated or made their own stuff. And TCU, I know they're working on that out. We hope they do, because it's a beloved, iconic logo, and it came from your hand. So that's a very cool story. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
And it lasted for a long time, like you said. But back to you, Marshall. You were so bad at TCU that you got drafted in the 8th round to go to the pros. Making fun. You were actually
again, if you have some unreasonable number of tackles as a defensive lineman because you're on the field the whole time, you want to draft me? Okay, fine. So, but when I got drafted, I had after the last game, I had no intentions of ever playing football again. I mean, I'm going to be a graphic designer, and so when I got a call from the New York Jets office on draft day, and they said, "Congratulations, you've been drafted by the New York Jets." I went, "Damn it!"
Yeah,
it's like,
We only won 2 games, you realize.
Yeah. And but the caveat is I got drafted. I was number 8 in the draft, and they drafted Marty Lyons and Mark Gastineau as number 1 and 2. So I came into camp vying for the same position that 2 really amazing defensive linemen were vying for. So I didn't wind up staying with the Jets. I wound up getting picked up by the Browns the following year.
And you had a decent NFL career.
Yeah.
You're satisfied with the way it turned out, and just
compared to playing at TCU, we actually won some games, and people didn't throw things at you at the grocery store. Yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, nobody threw anything at me at TCU, other than insults. But so the first year I was with Cleveland, I was part of the cardiac kids team, and we almost went to the playoffs. Had this crazy ice bowl thing, and there's legend made of the cardiac kids that I was a part of. I roomed with Lyle Alzado on the road.
Wow. Oh,
wow. And so that was pretty true. And I went out and trained with him during the summers. So it was, the Browns years were interesting. The year I went to New England, it was one of those, I don't care if I play. I got picked up, and I'll do my best. So I wound up playing there. And then my agent called me about the middle of the season. He said, hey, there's this thing called the USFL happening, and they're giving guaranteed contracts. And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, you sign a contract, and it's binding on the team. So if you get hurt or they cut you or anything, they're obligated for the contract. I said, is there anything like that in the NFL? He said, nah, nothing. I said, well, let's investigate it. So I wound up signing a contract the day before Thanksgiving with the New Jersey Generals. Mm-hmm. And the day after Thanksgiving, I was asked to bring my playbook to see Ron Myers, who's the head coach with the New England Patriots. So the NFL did not see the transition to a new league, and it was not in their good graces. But I wound up playing with Herschel Walker and Brian Sight. Well, Brian was with me with the Browns, where I was with him. And the rest is history. I retired in 85 or 86.
Were you drawing, doing stuff creatively all along? That just stops when you're playing?
Well, when I was playing, it was about the game. It was about being a ball player. It was about working out. It was just being a knucklehead.
Yeah.
And spending every penny I had. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until when I was with the Browns, I take that back. When I was with the Browns, I interned at a couple of the local ad agencies, because I had a degree in commercial art. And they said, well, hey, it'd be great PR for us to have a Cleveland Brown as an art director. Mm-hmm. So I got into my beginning profession before I actually retired from football. And so that was one of the only smart maneuvers that I sort of made when I was playing. And then after I retired, transitioned into advertising and marketing.
Yeah. Before we get to that piece, real quickly, people know the name Lyle Alzado. Who was Lyle Alzado to you, if you mind describing your...
Lyle Alzado was like a lost brother to me. And Lyle, his persona, it was very Hollywood. I mean, he was big, and I've never seen a man throw things as easily as he did. Super, super strong, and tremendous, motivated, ferocious competitor. But in life, he had the same sort of foibles that all of us had, and he was a great. My rookie year, I roomed with him, and then after the season was over, says, "Hey, Marsh, I want you to come out and train with me during the summer. I've got a guest house you can stay. I live in Brentwood, and we'll just work out." And I went out there and lived for 3 months, and we'd get up in the morning and go to Gold's and work out for 2.5 hours, and then we'd go eat breakfast, and then we'd go do yoga, and then we'd go run the concrete mountain, and then we'd go back in the afternoon and work out for another 2.5 hours.
Jeez.
It was, and I went from 255 to 295 with a 6% body fat.
Jeez. Unreal.
I came back and they just went, "Oh, what happened?"
All protein shakes, nothing else synthetic going in there?
Unfortunately, no. And if you know the story of Lyle Alzado, if one vitamin C is good, I'm going to take 12.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, actually, the world of competitive athletics, you do what you need to stay competitive, because if you don't, there are 100 people waiting to take and step right into your position.
Yeah.
And so at the time, people frowned upon it, but when I came back at 295, the Browns said, "We think we know what you've been doing. We just want to make sure that you're healthy. We want to take and do blood count work on you each week." And so they didn't say don't do it, but they, wanted to make sure that it didn't affect your health.
Yeah.
But anyway.
That's incredible. So moving along to your advertising period of your life after football, obviously you're doing things that are creative and artistic, and that period of your life led you to obviously to where we are today, and where you've been for a while with your artistic ability, which is significant. I think maybe this is a bold statement, but your graphic drawings is where I got to know you, where I think you stand out. You're a giant among mentally and physically and everything. You are bigger than most in that world. The graphic design you do, I believe you to be one of the greatest that I've seen, and I've seen a lot. Your humble nature suggests otherwise, but you're a fantastic artist in the graphite world, Marshall.
Thank you.
So, when did you realize that you had a talent to make this a career, or have you yet?
When I found out that I didn't want to do whatever else I was been doing, I had to figure out what I didn't want to do before I could figure out what I did want to do.
Yeah.
And that took me almost, it was my mid-50s. So
Is that when you went to Pennsylvania then and got was there a degree that you got there?
Yeah, I went back to school. Well, I worked in the advertising business. I worked in New York when I left the Jets. I worked there for 6 months before I came back to Texas to train for the Browns. But anyway, so I've always been creatively involved. But when you're in advertising and marketing, you're using your ideas for somebody else, and you're creating, marketing campaigns or advertisements or television commercials, or eventually I was doing museum interactives and educational programs and stuff like that. So you're always using your creative juices for somebody else. And I think you know the story about being in New York on 9/11.
Yeah, I was about to ask you.
Yeah. So I was setting up a trade show for one of my clients, and on 9/11, and I that morning, I flew in the night before and had plans on having breakfast at the top of the world the next morning. But you have to be on the showroom floor about 8:30 when things really start getting busy. So I decided, well, I'll walk down to the Javits Center from my hotel. It was a beautiful morning, and walked down, and we got started. And there's fork trucks driving all over the place, construction people, electricians. It's just crazy. And the next day was when the trade show was going to open. So we had to get the booth up, and about, I guess it was about 8:30, 8:40, everything got really, really eerily quiet, and the fork trucks weren't driving around. And I went over to the stage where all the workers are distributed from, and the guy was saying there's something happened at the Trade Center. We don't know what it is, but we've been told by the federal government to take and pack up what you can carry and leave the building. And so when I walked out of the Javits Center, you can see the towers from the front of the Javits Center, and one of them wasn't there anymore. And I talked to the lady next to me. I said, "What happened to the other tower?" And she said it just fell down.
Oh, wow. What transpired next for you?
I said it fell down, and she said, "Yeah, something really, really bad happened." And it was that day I went to Central Park and spent a lot of time just sort of reflecting.
While this is all going on?
Yeah. And what's weird is the people in Central Park are having picnics and playing Frisbee and all sorts of stuff, because they live in a city that terrible things happen every day, and there's nothing they can do about it. So they're just, they're carrying on with their lives. It's incredible how it impacted the city after that. It took me 3 days to get out. But in those 3 days, I decided, well, that's what I was doing was not making me happy.
Yeah.
And so I need to do something else. And it took me another couple of years to figure out I was going to go back to school. And that's when I wound up at the University of the Arts pursuing a master's degree in sculpture. And somewhere along there, I figured out that making flat art is a lot easier than making physical big pieces of sculpture. And that's when I started drawing.
When did you come back to Fort Worth?
2010.
10, okay.
Yeah.
So you're making art, you're doing all these things we mentioned prior to this. You won a big prize in 2013, the hunting prize. That kind of, don't know if it puts you on the map already, because my opinion is that you're already on the map, but that obviously catapulted you.
Well,
into
it's not bad. It's not a bad thing to put on your resume if for the art world, at least people in Texas knew what it was about, because it was a prize. The Hunting Corporation is a big oil and gas. Well, you probably know them because they make all sorts of machinery and they do all sorts of things.
Right.
Anyway, they have this art prize that they had hosted, and you have to be a Texas artist, and you can only enter one piece. And then they have a curatorial team of renowned experts come in and judge it, and they pick one piece to win the prize. And I'm new to Texas, and I'm drawing these things, these Western saddles, because what I was drawing before was naked people, and I figured maybe saddles might be a little more marketable. And so I entered one of the saddles, and it won. And
did you have multiple ones? Did you have to choose which one you were going to submit?
No, at the time I had only drawn one saddle.
Oh, no kidding?
And that was Roundup.
Yeah, that was the very first one. Yeah, and it made me really happy, because it was like, oh, okay, maybe there's and the Hunting Corporation purchased it for their corporate collection.
Right.
So not only did I win the prize, but I also sold the piece.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe these saddles are marketable, and so that's really become the bread and butter of my practice.
How'd you get into drawing the saddles?
When I first moved back here, of course, you have a thesis project in university, and I had decided I was going to draw life-size human figures and replicate every detail. So if you had a scar or a bruise, that would show up in the drawings. And so I finished my thesis. When I moved back to Fort Worth, I looked around, and Fort Worth has changed, but it's not as progressive as Philadelphia or Los Angeles. So I thought maybe I need to draw something that's a little more kind of in the Fort Worth. And I went to the Cutting Horse exhibition, and went to the trade show, and they've got these big huge trailers, and they've got all sorts of horse tack and everything you can think about raising horses, and these really beautifully crafted saddles. And I looked at one and I went, maybe that's it. Each one of those has got a design, a specific use. It's like a functional piece of art. So maybe I'll draw one of those. And I was in Teskey's had a retail store down on West 7th at the time, and Michael Teskey, who's the owner, their main gig's out in Weatherford, and he probably has 300 saddles that are everything from just a beat-up working saddle to an amazing show saddle that people have given him because they don't have anything to do with them. And so that roundup is where I found that was in one of his retail stores. So I contacted him and said, hey, I'd like to photograph it and draw it, and that's how it happened. So
go ahead.
No, I was going to say you're not, and you've done many saddles now, and they're in collections all over the place, in some really high profile collections. But you're not just a saddle guy. We've talked before over the years. That's not just all you do, and you don't want to be pigeonholed, I don't believe, as being the saddle guy.
No.
Unfortunately, that's part of the how things work. But you've done so many other things with your art that I've seen. The toe tag exhibit was fantastic, and some of your skulls and some of your more modern pieces too.
But that's a little confusing for the art world, because the art world likes to take and pigeonhole you and figure out where you fit. And because I do utilize the medium dictates or the idea dictates the medium, and so I may come up with an idea that it's just not practical to draw it. It means it needs to be a three-dimensional piece or a video or something. And so I'll create the saddles have become the known bread and butter, and sort of the 75% of the practice.
Right.
And the other stuff that I do is me going to recess, and so I show it with the anticipation that some of it might sell and some of it I might just own forever. And but I've been very, very fortunate, and through associations and with JW and Lauren and the guys at Cufflink now, and some people in other cities, I finally found something that I really enjoy doing, and can see doing it till I can't do it anymore.
So every article I've read says that you do in your drawings pick out the imperfections and things. So is there a theme? Is there something subliminal in that? Something that you're trying to purvey with that? And do saddles? Some of those saddles are so beautiful in the way
Yeah.
they've done. Do they have imperfections too? So it's kind of like two-part question.
So yes. So the answer is yes. The imperfections or the design tell you a lot about who the saddle was made for, what use they used it for. J.P. Bryan, who's a guy down in he's out of Houston. He's a financial guy out of Houston, and he's also the Texas #1 historian. He's got a museum. He wound up moving his offices to Galveston. Well, he closed his offices down and moved his collection from in his offices, kind of like this, to a building that they purchased, and he's probably got 300 saddles. And I had a great meeting with him, and he said, if you become a proficient at reading the saddle, looking at the wear on the saddle, looking how it's designed, you can tell who used it, what work they did, and where they were. So if the cantle of the back of the saddle is high and rounded, chances are they working in high planes so that when you're going up a hill, they don't slide out of the back. If it's flat and low, they're probably doing roping work, and and bulldoggers want to take and be able to slip out of the saddle really easy. And all of those the show saddles that are designed, and each one is a masterpiece work of art that actually is functional. And so that's the history. And there's a Japanese term called wabi-sabi, and it speaks of the character that an object gains with use. So something that's brand new, it's brand new. It has no character to it. But if it's been in the family for several generations and the teacup is cracked, and we're going to take and fix that crack with gold inlay, all those imperfections tell a story. And so those are the things that I look for really in all my works, is those underlying things that our lives are so hurried that we blow by those details. And so my underlying hopes are that no matter what I do art-wise, it slows you down enough to take and look at it and notice one of those imperfections and go, why did he draw that? What's the importance of that scratch in the leather on that fender of this saddle? Where did that come from?
So good.
Yeah. I asked that, but most people would be like, why would he draw that? It just, he should
just
make
a
it
saddle.
perfect.
Yeah,
Or,
right.
why would he add that? Like,
Well, that's the
just
beauty
make it
behind
perfect,
being an artist, is we are visual editors. So we
Yeah.
can add or subtract what we believe to be more important for the presentation or the story that we're telling.
Yeah.
What are you working on today, currently?
I've got a saddle that is the owner lives up in Bend, Oregon, and it's his grandfather's saddle. It's called Grandpa's Ride.
Nice.
And his grandfather is a first-generation Italian who moved to Houston and started raising Brahma bulls and became very, very successful at it. And this was his grandfather's working saddle. So it's nothing, has almost no silver work on it. It's very, it's a used saddle, but the patina and the wear markings and all that sort of stuff is what's challenging in drawing.
Nice.
Where do you go on these hunts for these saddles with stories? Like, is that part of your?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I've got the next series of saddles that I'm doing. I'm focusing on historic figures throughout Western and Mexican history and Native American history. And so I just went up to the Wool Rock Reserve. It's up in Oklahoma, where they have a Buffalo Bill saddle. They've got a whole bunch of stuff, but what I was interested in is this Buffalo Bill saddle. They've got one from Teddy Roosevelt and a whole bunch of other ones. But the figures I'm looking at is two Hollywood figures, somebody like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers, somebody in black cowboy culture, two women, either as part of the true Western pioneering or, somewhere in that, and then first Americans I'm looking for. And it's very difficult to find artifacts for our first Americans because they were so utilitarian. Not too many things exist anymore.
The originals, yes. Can you ride a horse?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a horse small enough for you to, or big enough, for you to?
It's called a Bergeron. it's like a Clydesdale,
Yeah.
but bigger.
Yeah.
And one of my ex-wives told me, I'm going to get you a horse, but it's going to be a Clydesdale.
Well, on that note, I mean, your hands are huge. Do you use one of those little expanders on the pencil? Like, I mean, I got to think that
you would giggle if you saw me drawing, because
it's like the grip is.
Well, I use an extension on the pencils, but that's just because if you're drawing way over there and you're drawing with the tip of the pencil, you got to get your arm way over there. And this allows me some extension, because my drawings are always quite large, and I can only reach so far. I work on a flat surface. I need to figure out how they can work on a vertical surface, but I use mechanical pencils. The work is I mean, I have a jeweler's loop that I use.
Oh, it looks like a mad scientist. I've seen you before.
Yeah,
it's a really cool contraption.
It's basically a magnifier that you put on, and if you're working on watches or you're working on jewelry, it gets you right up there. But when I'm replicating stitch work on a saddle, I mean, these things are, like an 1/8 inch long, and I want to draw them so they're accurate.
Yeah. So, I mean, is it like, are you on a fibrous paper?
Yeah, the paper is called Mylar, and it's a synthetic paper.
Yeah.
And it resembles vellum or like a really thick tissue paper, so it's kind of translucent.
Oh, yeah.
But because it's a synthetic paper, the graphite just floats around on the top, and you can literally paint with it. So I've had some discussions with people about, the word drawer is kind of awkward. So could I be like a graphite painter? And technically, I am literally, because I'm moving the pigment, although it's dry.
Is there just like a smudge factor though with moisture and stuff then?
Well, you're asking some good questions.
Sorry, I'm in the zone with you.
That's what you do when you don't have a script, Marshall.
Yeah,
you ask
yes.
I'm free. Yeah.
So the great thing about Mylar is I can create photo-like qualities, and so people will argue with me that my drawings are photos, and I'll say, no, here, look around the back, you can see the pencil work, but from the front it all blends, or you don't see any pencil lines. And again, but that's because I take Q-tips and I make all the pencil lines go away.
Yeah. And
that's the beauty behind Mylar, is because it doesn't have a fiber, it doesn't grab onto the graphite. The only problem is it'll pick up a fingerprint like nobody's business. And I learned this in doing one of the nudes that I was working on before I came down to Texas. And it was a life-size female frontal pose, and I'm working on her thigh. And literally the graphite is like, almost not there.
Yeah.
And so I'm with a cotton ball, I'm rubbing smoothing it all out, and there's a handprint on her thigh. And once you get oil on this Mylar, you can't get it off. I mean, you can erase it and stuff, but it changes the characteristics of the surface. So I had obviously leaned onto the surface with my bare hand, and it picked up the hand oils.
Yeah.
So I never do that again.
Nice. So all right. So all this stuff you're doing is wonderful, and everybody who knows you appreciates what you do. But you have just recently done something even not better, but completely out of your wheelhouse. You've done an artist residency over in Paris, in France.
Yeah.
Last year, right? Last fall, I believe.
Yep.
There's been stories written about this. I've read many of them. I've talked to you about this. You've given artist talks about this. You've done some cool stuff. We wanted to spend a few minutes talking about this and the experience that you guys had.
Okay.
You went with your current wife, June Naylor Harris, who we love, a writer for the Star-Telegram. She's lovely. Great job there, by the way. Great pick.
I'm the beneficiary of that union.
So tell us about this artist residency, please.
So you'd asked earlier about this tattoo, Trust the Universe Unconditionally, and this is a great example of, you may not know where you're going, but if you're making excellent time, you're still heading in the right direction.
And that's white. Like, show the camera, because
you can't see it because I'm tragically untanned this year.
But when you tan, that thing
shows up. Yeah. And I had it done in white because my mom really doesn't like tattoos, and so
good idea.
She frowns upon it. Anyway, so I'm working at Fort Works Art, and Lauren has been gracious enough to take and give me a studio space as part of her Gallery of Dreams project. It's a 501c3 thing. And so she said, well, how would you like to work at the gallery? I said, okay, that'd be great. So I had this studio space, and it wasn't secured, so I couldn't lock it when they had an event or they had an opening. And so I'd always have to go up and do a dog and pony show. And this particular time, it was one of these that I was in a particularly foul mood, and I didn't want to do it. And I went up there anyway, and Jovi Roden, who's a friend of, became a friend of mine. She's a collector. She has some of my work. Came in and brought some of her friends. And one guy was named Monty Laster. And Monty sounds just like anybody from Texas. He has a home out in Santo, and that's where he met Jovi. But he also lives in Paris. And he's lived in Paris since he was 19, on and off. And you know that he's Parisian when he breaks into fluent French. And so I was introduced to Monty, and over the next 6 months, we had a number of discussions. And Monty explained to me about he's a very successful interior designer. But we didn't find that out until much, much later. After we were over in Europe, we found that out. But his passion is doing what's called a social engagement process. There's another word for it, but it basically means he puts people together that you wouldn't think would go together, and they do a project. And he explains that the art is what happens between the people. And he said, I'd like to bring you over and have you do a residency, because early in our conversations, I told him, I said, I think what you do is really cool. And so if you ever need, like an assistant or something, if you got some heavy rocks to move or something, I'll come over and I'll hang out, And so he put this project together, and the way things happen over there is you come up with a project, you pitch it to the different organizations that are going to be involved, and they fund it. So he asked me, he said, I have this idea I want to take and bring you over for 3 months. Do you think you'd be interested in that? I said, well, give me a minute. Yeah, of course I would.
Yeah.
So we go, and I talked to him. I said, June is a great journalist, and I think this warrants the story being documented. And so I brought her along, and so we lived on the outskirts of Paris in an area called Saint-Denis, and we worked with 2 middle school classes. One was French students learning English, and another was a PE class. And then I worked with the American rules football club called the Flash, which they coach American rules football there. So I was working with 2 middle school classes, and this the kids were probably 16 to 19 years old. This football program, and I don't speak French, so there was this language hurdle that had to be. But Monty said, "Don't worry about it. It'll all work out." And so most of the time I had absolutely no idea what we were doing. The umbrella theme was resilience. And so I was working and talking to the kids about what resilience means and COVID, because the world over there is just like the world over here. They had to learn remotely. Yeah. The project actually got postponed for 6 months, because when we were originally supposed to go over there was the spring, and they had a big, they were locked down. You couldn't leave your home locked down.
Yeah.
And so the numbers came down enough that we went ahead and had the project, and we got this little sweet window that we came over, but we had to be fully vaxxed. Nobody messed around with masks. You basically just put them on anywhere you went. And we spent 3 of probably the most informative and life-changing months of both June's and my life, and working with people from lots of different worlds, where languages were all over the place, and we felt as embraced as we do here in Fort Worth. It was just an amazing experience.
Coming back home, though, you guys experienced, you had a break from this reality to that reality. Come back home, I think you've spoken about this, but it kind of makes you hypersensitive to the things we do here that are so vastly different there, and vice versa.
Yeah,
the issues that we take for granted.
Well, I think that our primary takeaway was everything that you hear about Europeans, unless you go to Europe, don't believe it. Because we have all been told, well, the French are rude. And they're not rude. They're just indignant to rude Americans. And so if you don't go over and at least attempt to practice civility and manners, everywhere you go, you walk into a store, bonjour, madame, bonjour, mademoiselle, leave, bonsoir. That's just customary that initiates conversations.
You would have to take your head out of your phone to do that, though. Would you have to look up from that?
Well, so, not to belabor those, when you are in a place for that long, And that's specifically what I told Monty. I said, I want to be in a place that I'm no longer a tourist. I want to become part of the community fabric. And he put us in a place that we were that. We were outside of Paris, so we were not Parisians. We were other. And other is, they're from Turkey, from Pakistan, from South and North America, Africa. They're Mediterranean. There are a million languages spoken. If you hear French, it's a second language. And every one of these people was from somewhere else. And we were embraced like we belonged.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of many places in America, if you walk in and you look different or speak differently, that you're not treated differently.
Mm-hmm.
And because Europe is a place, it operates differently. And maybe because we were insulated, we didn't understand the language. And so maybe they were having the same discussions, but because we were in French, we didn't hear it. But we were insulated from all of the political banter, all of the media, all of the stuff that we're bombarded with every day. And
well, there's this human factor to that, right? Just like looking at somebody in their eyes, and I mean, we're just listening to you, but you can tell we're listening to you. There's something that exists there,
right? That's
not language dependent. That is just, it's a human thing, in my opinion.
We function differently in the States, and it's only apparent when you get out of the States and you see just how differently we function. And I'm not passing judgment on it's good or bad. But what we did understand is in Paris, in France, and in other countries, we visited Belgium. Europeans, they work to live. They don't live to work. Mm-hmm. And so work is looked at as what you have to do to make a living, and but life is what you're there to enjoy. So conversations are like this. You don't turn on the TV and Netflix all the time. We watched very little television while we were there. We read, and we went to tons of museums. There were so many things there that were just culturally available that you have to, get a ticket for here.
Did you create anything while you were there?
I did a little bit. I mean, a lot of the energy, usually an artist's residence, you go and you do your work. And I was given a studio space. It was in a 100-year-old mill. It was super cool. When I say cool, it's like you were put in old world France in this kind of mill that overlooked a garden, and you'd had to see it to understand the coolness part of it, because other people would go, well, that's beyond rustic. Mm-hmm. But that's where the studio was. But because it was working with all these different entities, most of my week was spent putting together presentations or working with the football team. The coach, it was the first time he had coached contact football at this level. He had coached flag football for 4 years before. Coach Olivier spoke no English. There were a couple of kids on the defensive line, which I was helping, that understood enough English they could translate.
Oh, wow.
So I was there as an assistant coach with Coach Olivier, coaching up these kids in defensive line techniques, and he was as much of a rookie as I was.
Yeah.
So he came in with no, skill stuff, and between the beginning and when we ended, we worked up through emails and DeepL, a translation app. I gave him a skills drill packet of 22 drills, 11 for running play situations, 11 for pass play situations, and it was a circling back that I'd never figured out how my art and athletics would reconnect. But Monty made that happen. And I can't express to the folks that I worked with over there just how deeply it impacted me on a level of, I don't know how these things are ever going to take and reconnect.
Right.
But
you tag any buildings with the Flying T over there?
I was like, did you help them with their logo? Maybe you
no. I mean, they are. You need to look up the Flash in La Corneuve.
Okay.
The professional team. People don't know this, but American rules football is second to soccer in Europe. Cricket but there are 230 teams that are spread all over Europe. Every one of them's just got a badass name, and this organization was the one that began it all. And Bruno is the general manager, and when he was about graduating from college or getting ready to graduate from college, he came to the States. This was 40 years ago,
right?
And he saw this thing called American football. And he and his buddy were over here, and he said, wouldn't it be great if we could do this in France? So they got a sponsor to give them enough money to buy 11 helmets and 11 shoulder pads, and they came back over to La Courneuve, which is a really, it's a no-go zone. So unless you live there, you don't go there. But because they started this organization, it now offers all sorts of outreach programs, educational programs on drugs, on kids being bullied in schools. They teach soccer, tennis, badminton, all sorts of things. Anyway,
did you and June ever have the discussion? What are we doing here? Let's go back to Paris. Did that ever come up?
About every morning.
Yeah.
No,
we should go back.
Well, I'm 66 years old, and I can draw and paint anywhere I want to.
Yeah.
It's not like I have to be in Fort Worth. But yeah, we've had discussions about the things that we appreciated. We put in easily 10,000, 15,000 steps a day because mass transit there is subways or trams or buses, or you walk a lot. And, we come back to the States and we want to do as much walking as we did. Well, what are we going to do? Drive and park a mile and a half away from Tom Thumb and go get our groceries and walk back? That's how you had to do it.
But the climate here.
Yes.
Well, you can't, when it's 106 degrees, I'll spontaneously human bust walking from Tom Thumb with my ice cream
moisture
to the
on the
parking.
Mylar there, huh?
Yeah. So those are some of the things we'd like to figure out how to replicate here if we can. But yeah, the discussions of south of France, Portugal, somewhere like that might be in our future.
Well, Marshall, we have appreciated your time here. The last question we ask our guests every time we have somebody significant, and you fill in that category well. Besides marriage and children, what is the best day of your whole life? If you could pick one.
Today.
Oh man,
I don't know if I believe you, but is there another one besides today?
No, because if you look at a day that could be the shittiest day of your life, you're learning something on that day. Excuse me. And so to take and pick out, the birth of my children, super day, the waking up in the morning and just realizing you've got another day of breath and something to do with it should be the best day. And that was probably the takeaway lesson of 9/11 is I was supposed to have breakfast on the top of a tower that got run into by a plane that morning. And if something hadn't happened and I had not been there, it was a really crappy day, but it took and changed the trajectory of my life. And so the best day of your life is the current day that you're living. You should make it that way.
Yes, sir. Awesome answer. Where can people find your work?
Instagram, Marshall K. Harris Art, Facebook. I'm showing at Cufflink here in Fort Worth. Just Google me up.
Awesome. Marshall Harris, thank you, man.
Marshall.
We love you. Great job.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Captex Bank. We love you too, buddy.
Thanks, Mike.
FORTitude, Fort Worth.